This is I Read a TV, and we have in studio, this is Dylan Moore, obviously, the host here, and we have in studio Nima Major, the co-man, the co-partner, flown all the way here from Florida, which is awesome to have Nima in studio. Thank you, obviously, for making it all the way across the country from the last state in the country to California.
Yeah.
California number 3, Washington State. And we have in studio someone that, if you haven't heard of him, and it's likely you haven't, you're going to be wondering why. Because Mark Herr, the president and co-founder of CSG, the Center for Self-Governance, is training, I believe, he might be able to tell us a little bit about this, looking to see how we can train the new political leadership of, I don't know, the next generation, or moving forward to figure out how we're actually going to maintain the republic as we know it in the United States. Is that right? I mean, am I close to the description there of what you're trying to do? And then we wanted to bring Mark here to talk about a lot of things. We'd like to have Mark back to talk more after the show because there's a lot of things we could talk about. But we wanted to go over at the beginning here the pain, the political pain, symptoms versus causes that we're seeing. At least we could focus on the United States. Maybe we can get to the rest of the world. The pain, the symptoms, the causes that we're seeing here, and what is it that we can actually do about it beyond just pointing it out, right? Like, oh my God, things are really bad. Things are really bad right now, aren't they?
Right.
So you want us to tell a little bit about symptoms and causes and solutions?
Yeah, so I used to be a mechanic in the United States military, and the way I was trained is to the symptoms really mainly are like indicators. And when you're trying to fix something, you have to look beyond the indicator because the indicator is just a piece of information about what the problem is, or the word you use, the cause of why the plane's not working. And the same is true for our body. Same is true for our relationships. And right now I can say as a former master mechanic in the U.S. military, right now our nation, our culture is having a collapse. And the symptoms are all indicators, like the border crisis or Afghanistan withdrawal, the COVID-19 response, vaccine mandates, critical race theory, comprehensive sex education, school boards listing parents as domestic terrorists. Those are all symptoms and indicators of the system collapsing. And so part of my background is just understanding how to troubleshoot the indicators in order to come up with a strategy to fix the problem and nailing it down specifically, what is the problem? Because if you notice our conversations around the country, we spend a lot of energy, and there's a lot of money to be made in having conversations about symptoms because there's thousands of symptoms right now. But it seems like conversations never get to the root. Right, it always kind of circles the root.
And as someone who wants to, I'm a solutions, problem-solving oriented sort of person. Someone who's always looking to solve a problem. I get frustrated listening to this constant. Let's talk about the problem. Let's talk about the problem. Look how bad the symptom is. Look how bad the symptom is. Oh my God, they're doing this now, and oh my God, they're doing that now. It's like, okay, now what? Right.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like a circle jerk. Sitting around.
Yeah.
Isn't it bad?
It's really bad.
Isn't it? It's really bad. Isn't it?
Yeah.
It's terrible.
Yeah,
it's
really
terrible.
Scary
it's
and
super
horrible.
scary. We're going to die. We're going to die, right?
Yeah.
Don't you agree?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's talk about it some more. Yeah.
So we circle jerk the symptoms around the table, and what we need, what our organization does is we try to train folks out of the political habit of reviewing the symptoms because it's a time-sucking black hole. It literally is a waste of their time politically. And help them identify, okay, these symptoms are coming from somewhere. There's a source of the symptoms. And when we were troubleshooting planes, for example, they would throw all the symptoms at us, and the human side of the brain naturally goes to the symptoms, and it's very difficult to take a deep dive. That's why I appreciate what you guys are doing, because our culture has a hard time going deep. It's a very difficult for us to take a deep dive. In order to fix a refrigerator, a car, your body, you have to go deep, right?
Right.
And our
for sure.
our human nature, we naturally go topical, surface, symptoms.
Here's a pill.
Here's a pill.
Yep.
Right? Here's an aspirin. And if we really want to fix the root causes of the problems in our culture, then we have to go beyond the symptoms in our conversations and to the problem.
Well, it's also the nature of the news media. I think it's so superficial. It's all just discussing symptoms and sound bites and talking points and people just barfing,
Right?
talking points at each other.
It's like each other barf, and then you eat my barf, and then
Yeah, I
you
barf
barf,
back,
and then
I back
I
up.
eat your
Yeah.
barf. Yeah, and we're just having so it's not circle jerk and a barf eating contest.
Yeah, exactly.
Painting a great picture for everybody to visualize. right here from the beginning. But can you talk? So can we shift the conversation? So we just did a great rendition of how bad the problems are. Can you tell us a little bit about solutions?
Sure.
Yeah.
So when you identify the problem, then it takes you on a completely different path. Identifying the problem allows you to craft actual tangible strategies with tangible solutions. When you're stuck in the symptoms, you find yourself not only reviewing the problems, you end up trying to fix the symptoms, but another symptom's going to pop up. So now you're playing whack-a-mole with the symptoms. So it's really important to identify the symptoms. Yes, there they are.
Right.
Now we shift over to the problem, which is a very important part of the equation. What is the problem? What is the cause of these symptoms? Because without that, it's impossible to identify solutions.
Right.
So you'll find people in politics that'll say, well, I'm fighting for the Second Amendment. That will fix the problem. Well, wait a second.
What does that mean?
Yeah, what does that mean? Immigration. The walls are open. Well, if I just focus on immigration, that will fix the problem. Election integrity, that will fix the problem. School boards, if I get the right school board elected, right, I will fix the problem. But if you notice, we've never actually talked about, well, what is the problem? What's causing the immigration, the CRT, the school board, the Second Amendment?
Right.
But if I focus on that, I'll fix the problem.
Right.
But they never actually identify it. So step one is get away from the symptoms, but recognize them. Number two, what is the actual problem? What's causing the symptoms? And then number three, with that information, I can craft a solution.
Right. And then in terms of what's causing the problem, now I've taken 2 of your systematic politics classes where, just to let everybody know, I helped facilitate Mark coming over to my area, and we put on a class for him to teach. I mean, it was like 8 hours, 8 or 9 hours of going over, describing what the problem is, right? So we're going to do our best to talk about the problem now, but just to let you know, in the hour or so that we're going to be talking here, it's going to be hard to shove in an 8-hour class, right?
Yeah. So
that being said, can you get a little more specific with what the problem is?
So when two human beings come into contact with each other, government happens.
Unfortunately, yes.
Right? So if we all started talking at the same time, it would be totally chaos, and maybe everybody would get some entertainment value out of that.
Right.
We're just all talking at the same time. Well, in order for us to have anything productive in the relationship, one person talks, another person. Okay, so we go back and forth. That's just like a natural form of government. Now multiply that by 7 billion people. Right? So over human history, we create forms of government to regulate those relationships. And so when we look at our form of government in the United States, say compared to North Korea, both of them have the exact same form of government. Right? North Korea, however, is a communist form of government, and the United States is not a communist
Wait a
form.
minute. Unpack that a little bit. So
Sure.
So the United States and North Korea have the exact same form of government. And then you said communist versus, I cut you off, but it's obviously not communist here yet, or
Right.
we'll talk about more whether or not communist is the direction we're going. That sounds like not exactly the same. What's the pieces that's exactly the same?
Okay, so if you think about cars, for example, or airplanes, there's only a few frameworks on which cars or planes are built on. The same is true for governments. Throughout human history, there's been 5 frameworks that have existed on which you can build your government. So communist is not the framework that North Korea is built on. It's built on a republican form of government, and it has two political boundaries. But the model is communist. So if you think about the cars that we each have, like we drove here in a Honda Pilot. I don't know what kind of cars you guys have, but they're probably different models, but the frameworks are the same. Does it make sense?
Yes.
So North Korea's framework of government is the same as the United States, except the model is communist. Is you following me? Okay.
Kind of. Are you able to tell? So you said there's 5 different frameworks. Are you able to tell us what those 5 frameworks are?
Sure. So the first framework was in 375 BC. It's in a book called Plato's Republic. It's a single boundary system, like a single boundary chassis on a car. It has one boundary that separates one class of people from another class of people.
So the rulers and the ruled.
Yes.
Or the philosopher kings and
the governing and the governed.
Yes.
Right? The rule makers and the rule followers. 300 years later, Rome expanded their framework, that first boundaried framework that Plato described in his book, Republic. They expanded it to a two-boundary framework in 51 BC. That republic is built off of Plato's Republic, but they added another boundary to the system. For 2,000 years, those two frameworks were the primary frameworks of government.
And then, sorry to interrupt you, just because everybody listening to this could be absolutely curious. What's that second boundary?
So the first boundary was they consolidated rulemaking, enforcement, and interpretation into one small group of people.
So executive, legislative, and judicial was all the same.
As we understand it today.
Yeah.
And those who may not, at the time, all of those activities were concentrated into one area in Plato's Republic.
Mm-hmm.
What happened in the Roman era is the group of people that were doing the rulemaking and all that, they started hurting each other. They had no concern whatsoever for the governed. They were called plebeians in the Roman Republic. And it didn't matter whether the plebeians felt like they were being oppressed. The producers, the regular people, the governed. The slaves, if you will. What mattered was that the other patricians, was the name for the people in that higher group, they started feeling the pain of the rules and the interpretation, and they decided to separate rulemaking from rule enforcement, and they created a two-boundary or a two-layered Roman Republic.
Which, if we were to use modern terms, that would be executive and legislative.
Yeah, that would be if you're living in the United States and you have a governor in your state and you have a state legislature, that would be like the Roman Senate and the Roman Caesar, right? The governor of your state and the state legislature, very much similarly modeled after the Roman Republic. Matter of fact, we did copy that when we created the United States back in the 18th century. However, for 2,000 years, Plato's Republic and the Ciceronian Republic, if you will, those two frameworks are the primary, predominant frameworks on which governments were built, whether it was from Greece, whether it was the Romans, whether it was the Scandinavians or whatever.
Holy Roman Empire, England, yeah.
Yes, even the current system in England with the monarch and the parliament, it's modeled after the Roman Republic. But it's a different model. It's a monarchical republic, right?
Right.
Like communist republic, theocratic republic, agrarian. There's so many different models of republic. But the thing that when we're troubleshooting the symptoms, going back to the original premise here, and we're trying to narrow it down to the root cause, what's causing these symptoms, it's very important that you learn the framework. I'm not talking about the model. Communism, statism, globalism, capitalism, those are models. The framework to repair any system is the critical piece if you're going to fix it.
Mm-hmm.
And this is just coming from my training in fixing airplanes, okay? And it applies in politics. If people are willing to learn it, it could save them so much time and energy in terms of the division. And I can't talk religion and politics at the dinner table anymore.
Right.
You know, like we're seeing the division in the United States right now. Australia and Germany and all across the world, there's just this division taking place amongst communities and cultures. It will save your audience a ton of time if they could learn how to troubleshoot the symptoms and focus on the framework.
So
and
Go ahead.
Coming back to the two-boundary framework, it lasts for 2,000 years. In 1748, a Frenchman named Montesquieu said, hey, the Caesar and the Senate have been playing tug of war with interpreting the rules for 2,000 years. Maybe we should take that rope away from them.
And then just to emphasize, because when you make a rule, how it's interpreted is all the power that's in the rule, right? So if I could take this word and twist it to mean this, now I have control over you, whereas if I couldn't, I don't have that control. So
and that's the
interpretation's a big deal.
Well, who gets to make the rules is a big deal.
Right.
Who enforces those rules is a big deal. And who interprets the enforcement and the rules is also a big deal.
Right.
But neither of the three, they've always throughout human history, especially in ours, when we added rule interpretation to our system in 1783, it is a big deal because the natural human nature here is when you're troubleshooting the framework, the people who have control within the frameworks are naturally going to do two things. They're going to circumvent the boundaries, and they're going to naturally concentrate control to their center. Mm-hmm. And you can see that with like COVID-19, the pandemic or something. You can naturally see people concentrating control to themselves, and then the manipulation of facts. Like, just ask you, did the facts matter regarding the pandemic?
No, they continue not to matter. Yeah,
and we're seeing this in all kinds of cases, not just COVID-19. Are parents terrorists? The facts don't matter. President Trump, he's impeached twice without due process. The facts matter? No. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So this is the natural course of human history for those who have control of things, circumvent those boundaries, and pull control to themselves. And this is what I would argue is the reason why the number of boundaries in the framework of government has increased and evolved over human history. Starting with 1, evolved to 2. By 1748, a Frenchman named Montesquieu said, hey, we need to take that rope away from those guys. It's like taking a toy away from two fighting siblings. We need to take that toy away from them, and we need to separate rule making from rule enforcement from rule interpretation. 35 years later, the British colonists on the eastern side of the United States, they end up declaring independence. We're coming up on the 250th anniversary of that declaration. Mm-hmm. Now, in order for them to secure independence, they had to fight for it now. So it wasn't just, hey, this is a great document.
Right.
They had to spend 7 years killing each other, like shooting cannonballs and stabbing each other in order to secure their independence. Okay, mm-hmm. So it's a nice cliche, but there's a reality behind the framework of government you create, because it's going to, when you're troubleshooting your car falling apart, those symptoms are telling you something's wrong with the framework. Mm-hmm. And you better understand the framework in order to fix it. Well, we increased from Montesquieu's 3-boundary theory, and we created a 4-boundary republic in 1783 with a very weak Congress on top, with no president and no Supreme Court, just really, really strong states. So like Florida, for example, would have been just like super strong, and then they would send some delegates to Congress, but it was
no power. Yeah.
They had
no power, but
they had very little control, and the states had like if I could use a number, 95% of the control, and Congress had 5% of the control. Well, within 4 years, that system, that framework began to collapse very quickly. And they met in Philadelphia in 1787 and said, how do we fix this framework? Do we go backwards to 3, 2, or 1, because that's all they had in human history, or do we add more boundaries to the chassis, to the framework? Does this make sense? Mm-hmm. And this is what they did. In September 17, 1787, they increased it from 4 to 7 boundaries. And that's what the difference between the United States Republic in 2021 and the North Korean Republic is. Literally the number of boundaries in the framework.
So what are those additional 3 boundaries now?
So what they did was they created it's called dual federalism. Mm-hmm. They separated the federal government from the state government. Mm-hmm. And then the federal government has Montesquieu's 3-boundary republic, so president, Congress, Supreme Court. And then your states across the United States are very unique. There's not a single state in the United States that is similar in terms of their republican structure. However, what is similar is they have an executive, legislative, and judicial, but their controls are structured differently.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you have 3 on the bottom, 3 on the top, and a boundary between the federal and the state, equaling 7 boundaries in this framework of evolving republics since 375 BC.
So that was when the constitution that we have today was adopted, that was created?
In September 17th, 1787.
Gotcha. Versus the Articles of Confederation, which
1783.
Okay.
Right. And that one,
Was
it was a 4-boundary system. They increased it to 7 and 4 years later, and then they officially became the United States in 1789.
So in the 4-boundary system, the 4th boundary was we had the 3 boundaries in each state, and there was this 4th boundary where there was a Congress. And now there was no Supreme Court,
president,
there was no president,
right.
just, okay.
And what's interesting is that in between 1789 and 1852, that republic was functioning, except for one thing was happening. And this is where I want to come back to the symptoms for 2021 is states like South Carolina were using human beings as slaves for their economy. And there were people who opposed that in the northern states. And so they would send people purposely. They would finance them to move down into South Carolina, for example, and then create chaos in the South Carolina economy to disrupt their economy. And South Carolina became enraged, and actually they seceded in 1852, not in 1860.
And I'm sorry to interrupt. So they went to create chaos in the South Carolina economy with just the intention of saying, we hate you and...
Because they hated slavery, so they were disrupting the economy.
Oh, to trying to disrupt so they could fix the framework later, or to try to get the slaves out of there, or
because they wanted to free the slaves.
Okay.
Yep. So they created the Underground Railroad.
Right. Okay.
As a result. Okay.
Yeah, okay.
So South Carolina is saying, hey, we entered into a compact with you, this 7-boundary Constitution, 1789. So we want to secede. We want to leave the 7-boundary framework, and we want to go back to the 4-boundary framework of 1783, called the Confederated United States.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the Civil War broke out. Eventually, they lost, and they were forced to rejoin the 7-boundary republic.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that very same year that they were forced to rejoin the 7-boundary republic, pro-slavery president Andrew Johnson took over from just previously assassinated Abraham Lincoln. So he's a pro-slavery president, and the people who were involved in defeating South Carolina and forcing them to rejoin the 7-boundary system, they went into panic mode. They're like, we just overcame the people who seceded, but now we have a president who's pro-slavery, so we haven't won our war. So they organized in October of 1865, and they created a social science association in order to do 3 things. Number 1, prevent slavery, which is extremely noble.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want human slaves in the 21st century. Number 2, to prevent secession, leaving the 7-boundary republic and returning to the 4-boundary Confederated United States. Does this make sense?
Yep.
Okay, that's number 2. And number 3 is to pursue the betterment of humankind. So they did all kinds of things like judicial reform, media narratives, academic reforms. They created this, we know it as the progressive movement.
Mm-hmm.
Now, at the outset of the 20th century, they added a 4th objective, which was to readjust America. And when we hear that phrase readjust, what they mean is readjust one of or more of those 7 boundaries. And so a young professor named Charles Merriam in 1902 became the dean of political science at the University of Chicago. And he's primarily responsible for adding this 4th objective, preventing slavery, preventing secession, betterment of humankind, and readjusting America. And in his readjustment model, they definitely don't agree with a 4-boundary Confederated United States, but they most assuredly agree with either the Roman Republic version of 2 boundaries or Plato's version of 1 boundary. So you see this tension in American history human history of the increasing number of boundaries because the governing's human nature naturally concentrating control to themselves.
And the boundaries being there to make it more difficult
for them to
for
concentrate.
that concentration to occur.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's an evolution of humankind. That's not something we're just speculating on whether you're for it or not. That's just the reality.
Yeah.
But then you see in American history, some who tried to secede from that and go down in the number of boundaries, down to 4, the Confederated U.S., they got defeated, forced to rejoin. But because of the ascendancy of a pro-slavery president in 1865, they formed an association in order to prevent those things from occurring again. But at the outset of the 20th century, a 4th objective was added by a guy named Charles Merriam, professor at the University of Chicago, to readjust America from 7 down to 1 or 2 boundaries. In other words, go back to Plato's Republic or settle on the Roman Republic.
So now this sounds, because I learned about this when I took your classes,
Sure.
right? And to hear this at first, to say, okay, here's this guy in the beginning of the 20th century decides that he doesn't like this thing which created the freedom that we have. The fact
But
that
that's not what he's thinking. In
right?
his mind, he's thinking, no, that system produced slavery, it produced secession, it produced the greatest human capital casualty war in human history. That's what he's seeing.
I see that, but how does he not look back at Plato's Republic and say, well, the whole thing was based on slaves, right? That's the part that confuses me, and what confuses me more. I mean, it's not so much confusion; it surprises me that. Because I'm sure you want to talk a little about the influence that this guy had.
Well, I want to talk
within
about
the political system. Right?
Let's start with his belief system.
Okay.
So in Plato's Republic, they didn't break it down in terms of slavery and master. They broke it down in terms of selfless and selfish. Okay? And what Merriam argued at the outset of the 20th century is that we have to consider human nature. And you think about politics. People naturally just focus on their symptom that affects them. That's why 99% of humankind won't participate in politics until they personally feel the pain. If it doesn't affect them personally, they won't participate, right?
Mm-hmm.
Miriam's arguing something it's like valid, but he's not considering his own human nature here,
right?
Okay? Is that when we get involved in politics, it's because we felt the pain or we don't want to feel the pain. Merriam argued in Plato's Republic, it's not about slavery and master, it's about selfless and selfishness. So he's saying we have to account for their human nature, and a 7-boundary system, he argues, and he had a work that your audience you can read it online or buy it if you want. It's called The Written Constitution and Unwritten Attitudes. It's a 3-day seminar, a lecture he gave at Rochester University in New York. In that argument, he's basically saying, if you don't calculate their human nature, then you're making a huge mistake because the U.S. system, he argues, was built on small minority gentrification, private property owners. And the result is, when we look at the 21st century, population centers moving into the urban center, and the natural inclination is for the rural to seek more political control. That's his argument.
Interesting. Okay.
And so he argues for Plato's Republic, which is the advancement of the city-state, which is Plato's Republic. So urbanization, giving more power, more political influence to the cities, and de-emphasizing the rural in its political influence. And you can see that happening like in the state of Washington, for example. The vast majority of the legislature is controlled by one population center of Seattle.
Correct.
Does it make sense?
Oh, yeah.
The same is true in West Virginia. The same is true in Florida. It just happens that way naturally as people congregate to the urban center. And that follows Merriam's theory that the urban would gain more prominence in the 21st century as one of his justifications for reducing the number of boundaries or readjusting it.
I would also add to that during the COVID-19 lockdowns, we saw exactly that. We saw mayors flexing their muscles like never before.
Right.
And to me, whatever they did actually mattered so much more to my freedoms and my life than anything that was being done on state or federal levels.
Merriam argues in that work called Written Constitution and Unwritten Attitudes, he argues that the state is on the decline. So like Governor DeSantis in Florida, for example, he's trying to flex his muscles with the school boards, for example, on the mask mandates.
Mm-hmm.
And there's arguments over whether or not the governor can tell a school what they can and can't do based on the state constitution of an individual state. So we're going to see that playing out over the next 2 years of who actually has more control. Miriam and his crew, his group of folks, and I would say he's at the head of adding this fourth objective.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the first three being very noble. This other one it could be ignoble depending on whether you think.
Very flexible, yeah.
Right, it's very flexible. Is he wants to reduce our 7-boundary republic to either 1 or 2. And he says so in so many words in his various books. He wrote a book called Systematic Politics, in which he argues that if you want to change the allegiance of people in society, you have to prevent a better system. So
You have to prevent a better system?
present a better system. Down goes the old allegiance, up comes the new.
Mm-hmm.
And the name of his movement he calls Cooperative Federalism. So when we talked earlier about our system, 1783, it's called dual federalism. We separate the federal and the state. There's clear lines, right? The mayor can do this, but the governor can do that. In his new system, the cooperative federalism, the local, state, and federal government, all of their controls are mixed together like a marble cake.
It's almost like a unitary republic a little bit, like Spain.
Plato's Republic.
Mm-hmm.
It's the model, yes. Yeah, absolutely. So in his version of cooperative federalism, the way we gradually change the system is we don't have a revolution. We present a better system to the governing. You raise the mayor, for example, you raise the mayor's prestige, or the city council or the city manager's prestige, and you reduce the county health departments, the county school districts. What naturally will happen is the state will implode on itself, and the city will rise up. And in the meantime, you have this local, state, national cooperation that takes place, like with COVID-19, for example. The governors, President Trump, before President Biden, when it initially evolved, is their cooperation between the federal and the state in terms of how they were going to apply their response. Miriam believes that, in his mind, a 2 or 1 boundary system is much more efficient. But what he does not calculate, gentlemen, is the human nature of the governing to concentrate control to themselves and manipulate the rules, the enforcement, and the interpretation.
Of course. Well, I mean, it's impossible, and we haven't gone into the definition of selfish and selfless, but I mean, just kind of taking a bird's eye view of it. If I say, okay, you're selfish, so you can't make any of the rules, and I'm selfless, so I'm going to make all the rules, it's like bullshit.
It's a very selfish thing to say,
You're
actually.
totally selfish. Like, give me a break. And you can hide it with all this fancy language that you want, but there is a human nature. You are selfish. So by all the even if everything that you say about me being selfish is true, the same thing applies to you, right? So I mean. You agree?
Yeah. This is the Pandora's box that Miriam opens with his idea of readjusting America long before any of us were born. And so what we're doing is we are now, and I would argue as a mechanic, we are now suffering the symptoms of the problem he caused to the framework. Does this make sense? The framework shift, he's arguing, is that 7 is too many boundaries because it's not efficient, and he has other justifications.
Sure.
So he comes up with a strategy to start dissolving, not eliminating all of a sudden, little by little, 1 control and 1 boundary at a time, over time. Now he's dead. He's not even alive to see the fruit of his labor. So he created the Pandora's box that we are now having to deal with the symptoms. So when you and I have a philosophical discussion about selfless and selfish, well, he's not here to answer for that. You know what I mean? You and I have to be here to have the argument, okay, is Bill Gates selfless or selfish? Right? Well, he travels to North Dakota very frequently to coordinate with his fellow best friend, Doug Burgum, the governor of North Dakota, to influence an association that all 50 governors are a member of. But specifically,
the name of which is?
The National Governors Association. So Ron DeSantis is a member of the National Governors Association, and he's a Republican. And Democrat Governor Jay Inslee is a member of the National Governors Association. He's from Washington State. So they're on far polar sides of the United States. But when they come together in San Francisco for their biannual meetings to discuss future policies and how it's going to influence both Florida and Washington State, even though one is Republican and one is Democrat, it's very important to understand the influence over that association, its injection point is North Dakota. Okay, I'm opening up a can of worms.
But complete the thought, please, because that's fascinating. Tell us a little more about Bill Gates visiting.
Well, it comes back to the question you asked about the definition of selfless and selfish. Mm-hmm. Bill Gates has created computers, right? We've got computers, our phones, the technology that stems from his ideas and innovation have revolutionized the technological world. Now, the problem is, and this is the challenge, is that media that control the meaning of words, they define who's the villain and who's the hero.
Right.
They define the victims, right? The academics, they train the next generation of who are going to be the leaders. So if you're a conservative, for example, or libertarian or whatever, you get weeded out. Jurisprudence, lawyers, judges, right? I know a ton of attorneys in the United States that are being weeded out. Non-government organizations like Southern Poverty Law Center collecting data on who they label as white supremacist, right, for defending the U.S. Constitution that they label as white supremacist seven-boundary system. So if you're being weeded out, what you're seeing is this class of people in the United States whose job it is to keep the selfless and the selfish separated because they are the ones defining what selfless and selfish means. So the media is defining what selfish means. Those January 6 people, those Antifa guys burning down, that was just a peaceful protest. Academics, you're a conservative, you're going to get an F. You better say what I'm going to say, right? Or you're a professor like Weinstein from Evergreen. He's right, but he's a Democrat liberal. Wait a minute, what's going on here? It's because he wasn't towing the line that the seven-boundary system was a racist, neo-Nazi, nativist, terrible system. That all stems from Charles Merriam's original idea. It's not enough for us to prevent slavery, secession, and do good for the betterment of kind. We have to actually readjust America, collapse 5 of the 7 boundaries.
Can you speak a little bit to, so we brought up that here's this guy who had these thoughts, Charles Merriam. Can you talk about the influence that he had within politics?
Oh, so I would say he deserves 100% of the credit. And some colleagues of mine out there in the philosophical world might say, well, that's a little too extreme to say 100%. So I'll say 99.9999%. His influence over modifying the United States, number one, he deserves credit for his brilliance. I'm not saying it's right. What I'm saying, it's brilliant.
Evil genius. Yeah.
Strategically brilliant. So he comes up with the phrase cooperative federalism, and he designs a replacement form of government called regional government. And regional government itself has no internal separation of powers like Montesquieu argued. Literally, Merriam, because he's a hardcore Plato Republic guy.
And he literally says this in his books, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So like he's saying, I love Plato's Republic.
Yeah. He's like an acolyte. He's not a cultist. He's a deeper than a supporter. He's like, I'm a true.
Disciple.
He's a true believer. He's a disciple, and he says so in almost all of his works. Now, his influence. He comes up with the phrase cooperative federalism, which is the primary term used ubiquitously. So if you go to Wikipedia, you go to any sort of academic political science book, you're going to find cooperative federalism. Charles Merriam's the guy, all right? Mm-hmm. So it's a concept of we want local, state, and federal governments to cooperate with each other on ideas, policies, information, intelligence, et cetera, et cetera. He then creates a new form of government that's different than county or city or school governments. It's called regional government. He gets it injected into the system starting in 1935. He writes a book for President Roosevelt called National Factors in Regional Planning. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of Genesis chapter 1.
President Franklin Roosevelt, he's influencing.
The President of the United States.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, I've done some more research in the last few months on Mr. Merriam's influence over the president. So he was a consultant to 4 different presidents. All right, that's huge. I mean, there's been 46 presidents. So that's, I mean, do the percentage. That's like 10%. 10% influence over presidents of the United States over the course of his career. His greatest influence was with FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. They served on an organization he created to study human behavior. And that's where Merriam is the origin of the idea of Social Security, and FDR gets the credit for, but Merriam is the brains behind it. FDR is here, let's do it.
The action man.
He's the action man. The third thing, besides cooperative federalism, regional government, Social Security, is what's called the Executive Office of the President. And this is huge because the Executive Office of the President is what allows the President of the United States to use, I wish it wasn't complicated, to be able to use the Administrative Procedures Act of 1946 to circumvent Congress on making rules that are really administrative law within the federal executive branch.
Right. So basically, these are where the executive orders start to get close to what Congress is supposed to be doing, right?
Yes, but the executive orders are a piece of that, but the main piece here is that the executive office of the president allows the president of the United States to be able to hire people without congressional oversight. Charles Merriam is the creator of that. He's the creator of the idea of Social Security. He's the creator of regional government, of which the United States now has 97,000 of. And he is the origin of the idea of this concept called cooperative federalism. So in terms of his influence, I give him a scale of 1 out of 10, 9.999.
A dumb question. Was he also behind the Merriam-Webster?
No, they have the same name, right?
I'm just going to control the language while I'm at it, yeah.
When I first heard his name, I was like, oh my gosh, because I was starting to learn about him. I was like, man, this guy wrote the dictionary too. Whoa! But Charles Merriam, not the Merriam-Webster guy, but Charles Merriam, this political scientist who influenced this readjustment idea, major impact, I would say, deserves most of the credit for the symptoms we're experiencing today.
Was he a member of any particular organization or group, such as Freemasonry or anything like that?
He was the founder of the American Political Science Association of 1903. He helped found the American it's called the Social Science Research Council, which Franklin Roosevelt was a member of. He was tied to the National Civic League, but not directly. He influenced their ideas on city manager forms of government, which is like in Miami or Seattle, they would have a city manager, and the mayor is a figurehead. Yeah. Merriam is responsible for influencing the creation of that form of city government where the city manager has most of the control over the city council. That's one of his ideas. And so he's tied to many organizations, associations, and their creation, like the National Resources Council, the National Resources Committee, the American Political Science Association, Social Science Research Council. Yeah, it's just.
What was it that gave him the resources and the power to do all these things before all that? Is there anything that we know about that?
So he was born in Iowa, and he ended up moving with his family over to the D.C. area. That's where things get a little bit cloudy in his background in terms of like high school. He went to high school in Maryland, but in terms of like what his father was behind, his father was in the postal service, so there wasn't really any major influence from his family side of it. He gained his prominence for his ideas. He worked as I'm going to hesitate to say a spy, but more than likely he was a spy for the United States in Italy during the World War I.
Oh, so he wasn't
CIA? What was the name?
Well, it was pre-CIA.
That was
What was the name of this Italian guy?
I'm sorry?
What was the name of the Italian guy that he was working with?
He worked in Italy.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah. No, he was stationed in Italy. And his primary role was to disrupt socialism as it was being introduced in Italy at the time. Yeah. So I can't say for sure that he was a spy for the U.S., but he was definitely a disruptor. So the CIA didn't exist at the time, But if you're disrupting other nations and what
That's
they're
spy-like.
right? And
Yeah.
and he was doing this as a professor. He also traveled to several different countries for his doctorate, his dissertation: Russia, Italy, France, Germany, and so in terms of his influence, because of his ideas related to cooperative federalism and his connections related to the federal government and disrupting Italian socialism at the time during World War I. He also ran for mayor of Chicago. He didn't win, but he gained a lot of influence in Chicago because Chicago is a major hub for these ideas regarding cooperative federalism. There's so much more to unpack about Chicago.
You said the Weather Underground. Is that where they're from also, right?
Yes, there's a
Revolutionary.
President
people.
Obama. Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yep. University of Chicago is a major hub for these ideas, and he became the first dean of political science at the University of Chicago in 1902. So his influence, his prominence, his connections. Matter of fact, his connection to FDR. And I can't remember the name. FDR brought him on as the Department of Interior Secretary, and they were very good friends, and they helped run each other's campaigns in Chicago. And so he brought Miriam into FDR's inner circle because of that connection. So I'd say it's more about his connections
He
in
was just
Chicago.
really good at connecting himself and just working himself up the ladder. It sounds like.
Yeah, he was a modern day. I would refer to him as. And if you want to go down this rabbit hole, we can. A modern day Mrs. Elizabeth Powell. He used his influence. He built relationships. He was never elected to office, but he became a major influencer of presidents and structures of government. And
So would you be comfortable in labeling him, say, the hidden founding father
for
the current system that we're looking
for
at?
the current cooperative federalism, which they refer to as marble cake federalism because everything's mixed together, I would say he's definitely I would give him 100% credit for cooperative federalism and regional government and the current symptoms we're experiencing.
So, this is the second time I've heard this because I've taken your classes, obviously. But when I did first hear this, one of the first things that came to my mind was, particularly after you went over the different types of republics, because I fell into the category that, okay, we have a constitutional republic, which is different from, say, a democracy or a monarchy or a tyranny or an oligarchy or something like that. Or, I mean, we're supposed to have it, right? And then you give the description of saying, well, when you first came out saying, okay, yeah, North Korea is a republic and the United States is a republic. And I went, wait a minute, what?
Yeah.
And
they both are.
yeah, and they both are. Oh, yeah, I mean,
Yep.
North Korea's got a constitution.
They are literally a constitutional
they're
republic.
a constitutional republic.
The key difference is the number of boundaries in the framework. That's the key.
That's the thing I wanted to bring up is that was the huge thing, the first huge thing. I learned a lot of huge things from your classes. That was the first huge thing I learned is that is the qualitative difference.
Yes.
That this country has.
The more our culture spends time on the symptoms, the less they spend time on the framework. And I can troubleshoot this down to Miriam, readjusting America, influencing that specifically on specific things, okay, that cause these symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
And it literally comes down to the dissolution of boundaries and the leakage of those controls.
Because I wanted to bring that up. Unfortunately, we didn't have the computer hooked up ready for this, so I apologize to everybody watching. But when you gave us the classes and you had our handout or our booklet that you gave us, there was this map of all the boundaries, and there was actually a lot more than 7.
Yeah.
So it was, we had, there's the federal, and we've got the legislative, the judicial, and the executive, and then there's this boundary between the federal and the states have the counties. They have the cities.
And the states have the executive, legislative, and judicial.
This way. And then they have the counties, the cities.
The regions, the schools, yes.
The school board. I'm skipping the regions for now because that's what we don't want in there.
Okay.
Right. And, sometimes there's even lines in between that because, there's a bicameral legislature. So that, there's another line inside of the legislative piece. And at that point, with that map, we could say, okay, part of the COVID response for example, was that almost all the governors in all the states said we declare a state of emergency.
Yep. Except for South Dakota.
Except for South Dakota, we declare a state of emergency, and Washington is an excellent example of this.
Because Washington was the first state.
We were,
and then Idaho was number 2.
Where, and our grand and glorious Führer Jay Inslee still won't relinquish the state of emergency, obviously, because this gives him near legislative power. Right.
If you can simplify it, you could just say, rather than his personality, look at the human nature. What do people with control naturally do? Is they concentrate control to themselves.
Right.
Okay?
Well, that's erasing one of the lines on that map.
Specifically between the state legislature and the governor of Washington State.
Exactly. Yep. And then now what you're saying is, because we said, okay, we want to talk about solutions. We haven't actually got there yet because. Mm-mm. This isn't the 8-hour class, sorry. But when we're talking about solutions, we could say, okay, how do we maintain or put back that line that got erased?
Yes.
Right?
And it comes down to an important question for people who are feeling the pain and they're becoming involved because of the symptoms. That right there is what I call a mind-forged manacle. They're stuck there, and they don't realize there's all the framework. They don't know the framework because they haven't been taught the framework.
Right.
Number 2, they don't know the value of the framework. So if you don't know the value, you're just like,
Yeah,
I don't want
this thing? Yeah.
I don't want this refrigerator anyway. It doesn't work. You know what I mean? But if you know the framework, you can fix it. I hope that more people will realize the symptoms are not the cause. The cause is people like Charles Merriam readjusting and dissolving boundaries. And one of the boundaries right now is between the governor and the legislatures of all 50 states.
Right.
We know that Kristi Noem from South Dakota did not lock down. She's the only of the 50. Now, all of the policies that the governors introduced, except for Kristi Noem, all look very similar because they originate at the National Governors Association. The president of the NGA at the time, back in March of 2020,
was our favorite.
Was our favorite New York Governor Andrew Cuomo. Now notice that he's gone because of a sex scandal, and what happened to his nursing home scandal? That's now disappeared.
I forgot about it. Yeah.
Because the policy, the idea, originates with Mr. Merriam's Marble Cake Factory National Governors Association. And so if you're going to protect your agenda, which is we're trying to readjust the framework, the facts don't matter. All we need is the chaos. We need the system to smoke. And then people will say, hey, there's a better system. We have a better system for you. So it makes sense that they have to get rid of Andrew Cuomo, the president of the NGA at the time, with a sex scandal. Well, why didn't they get rid of Bill
else
Clinton?
with a sex scandal?
Yeah, why didn't they get rid of everybody else with a sex scandal?
Yeah.
And why make the nursing home scandal disappear so quickly?
Because the nursing home scandal was in every other state, right?
Is every single state except for South Dakota.
And
including Florida. Florida had a higher nursing home death rate than New York did. To be frank about the death rates, because Cuomo's death rate, now his policy was we're going to move people that were COVID into the nursing home, and that created more death. There's a scandal there. But the nursing home death rates, especially in states like Florida, Republican states like Arkansas, et cetera, their death rates in the nursing homes were higher than Andrew Cuomo's. So
what they're trying to protect by getting rid of, because Andrew Cuomo, for whatever reason, drew attention to that, they said, okay, let's get rid of him.
I don't know that for sure, but what I'm saying is understanding Mr. Merriam's Marble Cake Factory, right? This regional governments and these associations like National Governors Association, it makes a lot more sense now. Mm-hmm. Why would Bill Gates choose North Dakota? Well, it's his best friend who happens to be the governor. So they meet every couple of weeks in North Dakota and they coordinate their influence over the National Governors Association. What is Bill Gates' number one focus right now? Vaccines, right?
Yep.
You see what I'm saying? And so it's not a conspiracy theory. It's simple. Mr. Merriam wants to readjust the United States from 7 to 2 boundaries. Everything, nothing else matters. The symptoms to them, they don't care about the symptoms as long as there's smoke in the 7 boundaries. That's a terrible refrigerator, you guys. See, it's smoking.
Yep.
We need to get rid of it. It makes sense?
Problem, reaction, solution, basically.
The Hegelian
dialectic.
Yes. So Mr. Merriam is dead, but his strategies live on. And we are subject to it because I think our culture is so naturally, when we only get involved when we feel the pain, And when we feel the pain, we're just focusing on a symptom.
Well, and then I mean,
So if we could get folks to transition their focus to the framework, we can identify specifically the boundary between the state legislatures and the governor being dissolved at this present moment, using COVID-19 as the tool. You can see that with the governors who have not relinquished their emergency controls. You can see that with the legislatures, like we're going to take back our, because not a single one has taken back the emergency controls.
but didn't Idaho try?
They try. Well, our students, our students in Idaho were able to get both the House and the Senate to pass a bill, but the governor vetoed it, and then they played their.
And he threw a tantrum.
He threw a tantrum. Yes, he did. He got on TV for like I don't know. It's like I think it was an hour.
How
or something.
dare you try to take my power away? I mean, it was amazing. Yeah,
It was amazing.
Yeah.
But that was because the students in Idaho that were focusing on the framework understood the game that was being played. And it's not that because Governor Brad Little is an evil man. It's just that his human nature was being played by Mr. Miriam's Marble Cake Factory. They were just feeding him his cheese, and his cheese is old guard Republican. He's a capitalist corporation. He listens to IACI, which is the Idaho Association of Commerce and Industry. Okay, they're feeding him the cheese, and he's eating the marble cake.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's not as though he's like purposely trying to collapse the United States. It's just easy to present him a better system in his mind. And those selfish Idahoans, right? Those plebeians, right? Those governed, they just don't know any better, right? And so now when we taught some students in Idaho how to compete with Mr. Miriam's Marble Cake Factory, they put all of their energy into securing that boundary between the legislature and the governor, and that was the response they were able to induce.
So now we're really talking about the solution. So I think that's worth focusing on for a second. And I'm going to ask you to toot your own horn.
No.
I'll toot it over here, and you
Okay.
just keep talking. So you trained the students. They haven't successfully gotten that back yet, but they made
How
the
to troubleshoot the framework.
How to troubleshoot it, and they were successfully able to get both houses of the legislature in Idaho to pass a bill. Now, they couldn't get it past the governor because he has veto
because
ability.
they were able to expose that the governor was unwilling to relinquish his emergency controls that were given to him by the legislature. That is our 7-boundary republic. Who has the controls and those boundaries, and who can take it back? That matters.
Yeah.
In the cause of the symptoms, the smoke that we're seeing in America right now, those boundaries and those controls absolutely matter. And anyway, we trained them to see the framework. We gave them some training on strategies and tactics, but it's ultimately their response. If the American people want to lose the republic, they have the right to lose. We have to alter and abolish. It's a declaration. You have the right to alter and abolish. What I'm trying to do is teach people that symptoms are one thing, framework is another. And if you can use these as indicators, immigration, critical race theory, you can troubleshoot the framework and identify exactly which boundary, what control is being shifted, and then together as a community make a decision. Well, do we want that boundary to go away? And you're seeing this now play out. Pilots walking off the job, and now CEOs are having to say, "Well, okay, we're
backing off on the vaccine.
backing on the vaccine man." The truckers not showing up in California. We're not coming to your state to nurses walking out of hospitals. It's a natural inclination for our nation. And so beautiful about the American form of government is this. Our history has a negative side effect, the slavery and all those things. But we are the only nation on earth where pilots, truckers, nurses, not in communication with each other, could all walk off in the last 3 weeks and cause policy shifts like that without firing a shot. That's mind-blowing, you guys, in human history.
Mm-hmm.
Mind-blowing.
You were just saying before we recorded this that some airline CEO said that they're rescinding their vaccine mandate.
My understanding is that today the Delta CEO said he's rescinding what he called the, quote, divisive vaccine mandate.
And also Southwest took it back yesterday, I suppose.
I'm hearing...
And I heard United just did too.
Yes, United is backing off.
That's great. That's great news.
You know, well, and this is a little-known fact, is that, you know, I don't know the exact percentage, but I know a great deal of percentage of pilots in the commercial industry are former military folks. And the military, you know, I was trained as a military veteran. My job was to protect America, to defend that outer boundary.
You swore an oath on the Constitution.
And that Constitution describes that seven boundary
boundaries.
system.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And so most of the pilots don't know that, but when they start to see, like, for example, there's a Marine who was put in prison for questioning the Afghanistan thing.
Mm-hmm.
And there's military people that we're hearing 350,000 are being discharged because they're not willing to take the vaccine. And what happens is those create injuries, like the 13 young men and women that were killed in Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm.
People could. I'm a military veteran. I'm not a strategist, a general. That's their job. But I'm not dumb either. that their lives were lost unnecessarily. And when you can see that happening, it's kind of like when someone dies in a hospital because the hospital protocol says we're not going to give them every possible right to try, ivermectin or whatever there is, whatever,
Yeah.
right to try. But it's our protocol or no protocol at all. And people are like, well, my dad died alone in a hospital.
Because you wouldn't let me see him, and you wouldn't let him take this drug. Yeah.
13 military people died, and you're like, they didn't have to. You see my point?
Yeah.
People, there's something in the human realm where it's selfless and selfish,
Mm-hmm.
right? When I look at someone who, in the military, who jumps on a grenade for his buddies, and maybe we didn't agree with the war, I would say that was selfless.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the war was selfish. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so we can have these debates again in the United States. And that's the beauty of our country is that right now, your show, even though it might be censored on YouTube, we can have these conversations as Americans.
We're not censored yet.
But you know what I'm saying.
We'll get there.
Right.
We'll work on it.
I'm working on it. I'm going to make it happen sooner or later. That's the beauty of the idea. I would say not the beauty of America as a nation, the beauty of the American idea.
Well, also to add to that, a lot of the decentralized technologies that will make censorship obsolete are being worked on by open source projects with American developers, but also developers from around
the world.
You know, so
Mhm.
In
It's a
collaboration, it's a spirit. Yeah.
So I think we're getting close to the end here, and I wanted to kind of have an opportunity to take a step back, because the core thing, the core element that I've discerned, and I think this is, correct me if I'm wrong, is first and foremost being able to describe what the seven boundary republic is. Once we've described what it is and we can identify it, then we could say, okay, is this valuable or not?
Yeah.
I think it's pretty easy to make the
Do we
argument.
keep it or lose it?
I think it's pretty easy to make the argument that it's valuable. Now, the fact that we haven't even done that step 1 and step 2 is what makes us, or at least one of the things that makes us, so easy to manipulate, because we're running around doing whack-a-mole with symptoms,
Yes.
like you said.
Yep.
So what you teach in your classes, and at the end here I want to give you a chance to shout out, how to get involved with the Center for Self-Governance, is how do we create the next level of political leadership
Yes.
that is actually saying, okay, I've identified the seven-layer republic. I like the seven-layer republic. Here's how I'm going to work to put those boundaries back. Right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that we have done a poor job in competition with Mr. Merriam. He's done a fantastic job of articulating why we should readjust America from 7 to 2.
Mhm.
And it's working. I mean, they're doing it. We can see it. We've done a poor job as the governed. We got so complacent and comfortable with our liberties and freedoms that but to give credit here is that it's purposely the training on the seven boundary system has been removed from education, whether it's for young people or for college students. So there's a number of things that I really hope to see in the 21st century as
Yep.
far as political leadership is. We need to rethink and reimagine how we describe the value of that seven boundary system. What makes it valuable? What helps it reduce the symptoms we're experiencing now? And why preserving those boundaries will help eliminate those symptoms, help get rid of the smoke, if that makes any sense.
Well, and then just to add, it also gives a clarity.
Yes.
Right? Because now what I've heard what you teach, and I could say, okay, now I could, at least I think I can, better than I could before, separate the boundaries from the problems or the causes. Now that I could think clearly, my freak out level goes down.
Oh, it's huge. What you're talking
Right.
about in terms of the stress level of the symptoms.
level, there we go.
I was on a phone call yesterday with a mother from South Carolina. She's in complete panic mode. Her husband is in the National Guard, and he's about to be fired next week because of the vaccine. Her son is going to a university in South Carolina, and they are about to kick him out of college because he won't get the vaccine. She has younger kids that are going into public school, and they're about to, she can't go to the school board meetings because
she's not
vaccinated. Her kids have to wear a mask, but you know what I mean? So she's just a panicked mom, and she's trying to do everything she can. And I just found myself, listening to her. I was on the phone with her for an hour. And, of course, naturally my heart goes out because that's just so
painful to hear. Yeah.
Because it's the American culture right now.
Right.
There's millions of moms like that right now that are just like their security, their status quo is being upended. Their husband's work, their children's future, prosperity, college, their relationship to their kids' education, they're being labeled domestic terrorists. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so she's in complete panic mode. And so talking her off the cliff of symptoms from critical race theory, comprehensive sex education, Common Core, data packs, masking, vaccine, she's just like one after another. And it's very hard to penetrate in the midst of the panic. So from political leadership, I want to train leaders who understand how to mentor them off the cliff because there's going to be a lot more pain in the coming decade. Okay? Mm-hmm. But we can reverse this. It's just we're going to have to create leaders who know how to I don't know how else to say it, create a net for these victims of Mr. Miriam's Marble Cake Factory because they don't have anywhere to go right now. And they're just running around like chickens with their heads cut off. They're just trying to survive. I was on the phone last night with a teacher from Washington State, and just listening to her just broke my heart because she's also torn because it's her job, and they're starting to target her because she's speaking out. And so everything that she does, her paperwork, and it's already really hard on public school teachers as it is with all the reporting they have to do and each student and so much data, and they're nitpicking every single, you know what I mean? They're just poke into her chest, and she's just you can hear her worn out. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's time for me just to retire. Maybe I should just go do something else. Okay, and those are valid things. But you can hear it, this mom. And so from a political leadership standpoint is developing leaders who can empathize and give them a place to go. The second thing is the political leaders need to be able to separate themselves from the emotion of the symptoms to the reality of the framework. Mm-hmm. That's very difficult for people to do because when you're feeling the pain, I'm about to die because I have stage 4 cancer and I've got 3 weeks to live and I've got to set my priorities in straight. Just think of yourself in terms of the guy who jumps on the grenade for his teammates.
Yeah.
And the person who runs away from the grenade. We need more leaders in America. I'm not saying to jump on the physical grenade. I'm talking about we need to be able to jump on the grenade of emotion.
You need to move toward the thing which is uncomfortable.
And the uncomfortable thing is the framework of our republic. Is it valuable and is it worth saving? The third piece is being able to...
I think we got a party going on next door.
Yeah, I just heard that. I was like,
so
yeah,
there's a party going on next door.
Party.
So yeah, we'll just dance.
We'll just
with,
dance. We'll
with
dance.
The party.
We'll dance
Yeah,
with
okay.
it. Okay, we'll dance with the party. So the political leaders need to be able to empathize with those who are just now recently being victimized by Mr. Miriam's Marble Cake Factory. Number two, they need to be able to jump on the grenade of emotion for their teammates. And number three, they need to be able to think strategically. Okay, people are naturally going to only do things to fix the symptoms. We need to find leaders. We need to recruit leaders from our culture who are willing to focus their energy on the system and competing with Mr. Miriam's Marble Cake Factory. I'll give you a practical example. The National School Board Association recently just labeled parents terrorists and asked President Biden and the federal government to weaponize the FBI to go surveil 14,000 school districts in the United States.
It's just like mind-boggling that you're even saying that, right?
Right?
It's just nuts. Yeah.
It's nuts.
But it happened.
But for someone who is thinking systematically and not symptomatically, that is a golden platter of I didn't explain Mrs. Powell. I call it Mrs. Powell's Layer Cake Factory. It's such a golden opportunity because
you can capitalize on the emotion.
You can capitalize on the emotion and you can fix one of the boundaries that are being eliminated. And that is that parents are being purposely, in Plato's Republic, there are no parents. A man and a woman copulated, a baby was popped out, and it goes to the guardian class, and they separate the selfless and the selfish.
Right.
Or throw them down the cliff.
Yes, bang them on the rocks. Yes, absolutely. And Plato, and if you think you can sort of see that in American culture and around the world. Parents, I'm unlocking a rabbit hole here. So, on September 28th, a Democrat Virginia governor candidate literally said in the debate, "I don't think parents should tell schools what to teach their kids." So parents around the United States, or at least,
Yeah.
they had that reaction. They're just like, wait, can you repeat that? Repeat that. Okay. On September 29th, the day after, the National School Board Association submitted their letter to President Biden saying, "Hey, parents are terrorists. You need the FBI. We are under immediate threat. You should label it domestic terrorism and hate crimes for showing up to school boards talking about their children's future." September 30th, Secretary of Education under the Biden administration is being asked by a Republican senator. He says to him, "So are parents the primary stakeholders in their child's education?" And the guy literally said, "They are an important part, but..." So what is he actually saying? Parents are not the primary stakeholders in their children's education. You have a Democrat...
The state is the primary stakeholder, right?
The city-state of Plato's Republic.
Mm-hmm.
The guardians are the primary stakeholders in a child that's born's future. That's what they're saying. And that's that's Mr. Merriam, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so from a layer cake, a seven-boundary perspective, a political leader could take that and run with that for at least until June of 2023. You could milk.
Did you like the specific date on that? Like, I know exactly how long I can milk that thing for.
You can milk. You guys could. I mean, the American people could milk that for 2 years easily.
Yeah.
And the reason why is because the backbone of any society is the mom and the dad and the kiddo. I mean, in any society that has thrived, it was the mom and the dad and the kiddo is trained for the next generation and the traditions and the culture and the ideas and the things, right? You take the parents out of the equation, the state becomes the parent. I mean, you're literally down to one or two boundaries in your whatever society you're living in. Okay,
Right.
Like North Korea, the kids aren't the parents; they belong to the state, right? I know in Switzerland, they take a test and that's what you're doing for the rest of your life. You know what I mean? So, if we could train political leaders to understand how to capitalize when Mr. Merriam's Marble Cake Factory makes a big, huge, blunderous mistake like that, and empower parents who are freaked out by symptom 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. That's why I was on the phone yesterday with two moms, one in South Carolina, one in Washington State, walking them off the cliff, jumping on the emotion grenade for them, and luring them into learning the framework for their kids' sake. Mm-hmm. Because if we can say, for example, what's between the National School Board Association and those parents is called the school board. There are 14,000 of them in the United States. Well, these parents are showing up to the school board because that's all they know. What they don't know is that Mr. Merriam's Marble Cake Factory has been feeding them all this marble cake, Plato's Republic, parents aren't the parents are extremists, parents don't know anything, right? Well, what if you were to go to your school boards? Literally, even if you don't have a kid, even if you're a homeschool parent, go to the school board member and say, who is the primary stakeholder in a child's future? And ask them, just like, I would ask you guys, like, who is the primary stakeholder in a child's future? What would you say?
As me? Yeah, the parent. As Mr. Plato?
What would you say?
Absolutely, the parent, the family.
Okay, so if you were the school board members and I sat with you at Starbucks or Denny's or something, right? And we just had a private conversation. They just said we're not. So I'm wondering, what do you guys think? And you just told me, parents. I said, would you guys be willing to introduce this resolution from the school board that recognizes parents as the primary stakeholder?
Sure. Yeah. I just agreed to it. Yeah.
Okay, you know what I'll do? I'll make sure I get all of these symptomatic parents to show up to support you. And no arguing, no screaming, no masks, no critical race theory, no comprehensive...
No re-elections.
No symptomatics.
Yeah.
No symptoms, only the system. And that is NSBA has the marble cake policy pipeline coming into those 14,000 school boards, and those parents don't know it. But you want to get those parents back to the table so they can have a conversation about critical race theory, comprehensive sex ed, mask mandates, vaccines, Common Core, data packs, all kinds of weird things going on in the school boards. Until they satisfy the answer to that question, who's the primary stakeholder, they're going to continuously be excreted from Mr. Merriam's marble cake factory.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So this is a golden moment opportunity for parents to say, okay, I'm going to jump on the grenade of emotion. I'm going to craft a strategy, and I'm going to empower parents to show up to the school boards, ask them the question, and that they say, parents, would you be willing to introduce this resolution? Because what comes next is the critical piece. And this is where folks are, give me the easy answer. Give me the aspirin. I don't give the aspirin in my training program. I give you the strategies and the tactics. I'm not interested in the army men. I'm interested in the political leaders, the people who can think strategically and understand if we get that resolution passed, we start withdrawing membership from the NSBA. You start withdrawing membership from the NSBA.
That cut off the marble cake lifeline.
But it takes. Step one is the people only become involved when they feel the pain, and their natural response is symptomatic. Give me the aspirin. And people will literally ask me, tell me what to do. And I'm like, I want to train you how to think so that you can figure out what to do. But it literally comes down to just learn the framework. And do you want to keep it or not? If you want to keep the framework, those are just symptoms. This guy has created a strategy to dissolve them by keeping you distracted by the symptoms.
Well, and I think that should apply to everything, everywhere. I want people to learn how to think and not what to think. It's so important, and it's so neglected all over the place.
Mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing to me how easy it is to convert such an amazing experiment in self-government into a repeat of human history. And it doesn't take a long time to do it. But I do believe there is hope for the United States because we're seeing people, they're feeling the pain. The key, though, is we have to get some of them.
Capitalize on that pain.
We have to capitalize on the pain and get some of them to learn the 7-boundary framework, articulate its value, craft strategy like they did in Idaho and other places, and keep some of those boundaries intact.
Mark, can you plug how to get involved with what you're doing, the Center for Self-Governance?
So our website, centerforselfgovernance.com, we have a free 6-minute mini course that kind of introduces you to some of these complicated principles. And then if you want our training, we have different kinds of training, but our main goal is political leadership, shifting people from symptomatic to systematic. We have some training that helps people if they're stuck in symptomatic. So we have we're the only organization to teach all 50 state constitutions. And we're the only organization that teaches the evolution of city and county government as it relates to Mr. Merriam's Marble Cake Factory. But we use those classes, just to be frank, we use those classes to help draw some of those who are stuck in symptomatic to be willing to take our political leadership training, because I think that's the solution to saving our nation, to keeping our republic, and remaining not just a beacon of light to humans across the globe, but an amazing concept of political leadership that includes the governed in the 21st century. So those are our 3 main training programs: city, county government, state constitution, and our 3-block political leadership program. And they can find out all about that at our website, centerforselfgovernance.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Mark, for being here.
Yeah.
And
I'm sorry I mentally waterboarded you guys with all that information.
we're not. We can handle it.
No,
we're good.
That's
good.
okay. I was just checking for a pulse.
No, we're good. Okay. Thank you again, and we'll see you back in the studio soon.
I appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for having me.